What is real regulation in Ireland? If our watchdogs don't bite, what are we even doing? Welcome to MOTH News. My name is Keith Walsh. Right, we'll have some news in brief. The tragic triple murder-suicide in Fermanagh. The man in question has died. He was on life support after the attack. A man killed his partner and two children, then himself. That was in Maguire's Bridge, and police say it's been treated as a suspected murder-suicide. Northern Ireland, let's remember, is one of the highest rates of femicide in Europe. A 2022 report by the Femicide Census ranked Northern Ireland, or the north of Ireland, whichever you want to call it, as the most dangerous place in Europe for women per capita in terms of domestic violence and violence-related killings. Like, what are we doing in Ireland to protect women and children? And the pointing the finger at people who have come from a different country or have a different skin color, that did not work. There was people burnt out of their houses. That did not solve the problem. So we know that that's about something else. The danger to women and children is not coming from immigrants. Fact. Absolute, undeniable fact. So stop doing it. Stop saying it. Let's move on and let's try and actually look after women and children and ask the question, why are so many women and children and so many women being attacked and killed in Northern Ireland by men from Northern Ireland? Or the north of Ireland. Also, in other news, RTE exit packages are under scrutiny again. The Public Accounts Committee has requested clarity on recent redundancy deals. There are concerns about golden handshakes in RTE, never, without transparency, and it ties into public trust into state-funded institutions. And boy, are we going to talk about public trusts into state institutions, state-funded institutions and state institutions on this show. HIQA and the limits of regulations. So we know that HIQA can inspect care homes and issue warnings, but lacks power to fine or shut down abusive operators quickly. That's important to note. So let's just, once again, if our regulators can only recommend and not act, then what is the point? So I spoke to, the reason we're late today, and apologies, I spoke to Cormac Butler. There's an interview coming up in about half an hour. I spoke to Cormac Butler about hidden bank losses, okay? So the banks have been hiding losses. The central bank have not acted and won't act. They're the regulators. They're not regulating. Regulators ain't regulating. Why? And I also will talk about how the reason for the homelessness, the reason we have the highest ever homelessness in the country ever, the reason you can't buy a house, the reason you can't get a mortgage, the reason the vulture funds are allowed to snap up all the apartments, and the reason the rent market is in disarray and in chaos, all goes back to 2008 when we bailed out the banks, and the banks weren't honest about hidden costs and hidden losses. And why did they do that? Because the directors wanted to make bonuses. So anybody that lost their house, lost their marriage, some people lost their lives to suicide from 2008 because they bought houses they couldn't afford, they lost their jobs in the crash. Terrible things happened to people. All of that happened because somebody decided that we didn't want to put bankers in prison. Think about that. We're going to talk about it. Cormac, that interview, you have to watch it. If you're trying to buy a house, if you're worried about being taken to court because you can't afford to pay for your house, any of that stuff, you got to watch it and send it on to people who might be affected by that as well. Right, let's go to Al, because he's been waiting in the wings, and we have serious updates in with our pal Jeff. I mean, it's celebrate good times. Come on, do 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 do. Can I just can I play this for you, because we played this last week, Al, and we'll chat then. We played this last week, and then one of our viewers made a video for us. So if you go down to play the video, it says viewer entry Leo. So I'd like to thank our viewer who made this little video for the movie trailer, which they think is about Leo. I don't know why they think it's about Leo. Anyway, they made this video, so have a look at this.
He was a man on the run, a stranger in a strange land, a refugee seeking asylum. But no one liked him because he was a bit of a dick who played by his own rules. And now time is running out. The chickens are coming home to roost, He's put all his eggs in one basket, and it's about to explode in his face. A decision will be made. To liquidate. Decision. Liquidation. Coming to a rundown castle near you soon, based on a true story.
Thank you very much, viewer. I'll just call you Kay. You know who you are, and that's absolutely brilliant. I mean, that is just. Thank you very much. It saved me a lot of work. You know, better than I could have done, Al. Al, we're celebrating today. Our very first show, we spoke about Geoffrey Leo. We were threatened with court action. I know you, thankfully, thankfully you looked after that, and we were okay on that front. But that was the very first thing we spoke about. The very first fraud, the very first case of our government and institutions and regulators not regulating, which led to this man being allowed to do what he did. What is the update on Mr. Geoff Leo?
Yeah, big shout out to our team, Field Fisher, who stepped into that process. So if you guys are dealing with any bad actors that use the defamation process as a way to try and shut you up, look up Field Fisher. They're an awesome bunch, very ethical, straight down the line.
This show is brought to you by Field Fisher.
Just wiped it out.
Good. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, so there's some live footage in there, right? It looks like have you seen the Minecraft movie? You know, the chicken jockey. So I think that's the new one. Chicken jockey. Sneak attack. That describes Jeff. Sneak attack. You know, he comes in behind you and kind of, you know, oh, sneak. And it was like, come on, let's be friends. Do you know at the end of Minecraft was like, I promise I won't. Let's be friends. And then he's like, throws the knife and says, you're walking away. That's him, you know? He's like, yeah, shake a big buddy. I'm your buddy. I won't do anything to hurt you. Sneak attack. So anyway, very serious matters here. But Keith, I call it as I see it. I must say you've done a phenomenal job, and I do want to thank you because you stuck with the story from the start. And you are. I was going to put up my own video, but I'll do it next week. But I wouldn't be able to top what you just showed, which is, do you remember Bruce Almighty with Jim Carrey?
Yeah.
Mr. Exclusive?
Yeah.
I'm going to start calling Mr. Exclusive where you're running to the story and everybody's like, what's this guy doing? And you're standing waiting for it to happen. And you stuck with it, in fairness, right? We raised it here. And, you know, as you said, we've dealt with, like a lot of our viewers don't realize, that in the background, you know, we were dealing with attacks. There was people coming at us. There were, you know, like this. He sent his cronies after us. You know, there's a couple of articles written about me. His big fans in the journalism industry. You know, Charlie Taylor, Tom Lyons, Ian Kern were writing stories about me. You know, they republished stuff. They re-ranked it again. So like they came at us hard, right, trying to cover up that they'd backed the wrong horse.
Yeah,
but they still won't.
Back the wrong chicken. Back the wrong chicken.
Back the wrong chicken. They were on like someone basket.
Look, it walks like a chicken and looks like a chicken. It's a chicken.
Look, thankfully, thankfully the currency saw a small bit of logic, but I draws that just they got huge amount of pressure, especially from Nia Van X, where she was like, "Look, guys, he actually going to do anything? He actually going to report on something?" You know. So they
a shout out to Neve as well for that work as well.
She's been working demonstrably on it. But look, we've highlighted a bad actor in a group of bad actors. But I guess just to unpack it, so it's an appointment of a provisional liquidator, which is a very experienced guy from Interpath, which would be one of the top firms for insolvency. It's a guy called Andrew O'Leary. Very capable individual, to say the least, and I think it's going to get interesting from a number of facets, but the main one is when they start opening this up now and following the money. You know, like there's been a huge amount of money discharged to this guy. I mean, I was in the US a couple of weeks ago, you know, and I met the representative of the fund. You know, we sat down, we hung out. We hung out twice in 2 days, which was unusual. So not only did we go for dinner, we went for breakfast the following morning because it was. Look, I'm not taking it back lightly, but it's just so like the story was just so unbelievable. I mean, like, you know, like he was telling me about Geoff Leo and Bernard Brogan flew in to meet the family. They did a big pitch. They went through this was not accidental. This like everybody's making the weddings out to be like, you know, these naive farmers with loads of money that just threw money in. Jeff, this is literally a family that has been absolutely, you know, personally impacted in a lot of ways, not only financially, psychologically, and the amount of stress that this guy and his buddies have imposed on this family is it's just absolutely scandalous, you know. And you know, they've painted this picture of the billionaire farmers that, you know, don't care about money, and it's just another dodgy business guy. But the reality is, they pitched and they took the money from this family in good faith. They gave it to them with goodwill and good faith, right? In the absence of, you know, a very structured approach, because it was sold very hard to them. And, you know, we've got a lot of people now running for the hills. But what I didn't realize is that Bernard Brogan Sr. was actually in
He was in with Jeff for the pitch and
pitching.
and
pitching
Steelworks is the company,
which they're all involved in, right? So as you see, it's the decision tree. It's the waterfall is Steelworks, Brogan Capital sits beneath it. So it's like, you know, where's the money gone, right? Like you've got loans of 11 million from Bank of Ireland against a hotel, a lien against a hotel that they bought for cash, which was 11 million, right? That wasn't Jeff. Like, that was his representative in Ireland, which is Bernard Brogan, right? So they need to step up now and say they've done wrong, right? You know, you've got startups on the back of it. You know, there was talks about Bernard Brogan Jr.'s startup called Pep Talk. That's quite high profile. That's now in financial difficulty. Just talks that there was money gone in there allegedly, right? And money used for hotels, bars, partnerships, to acquiring other technology. And then if you step over to the other side, right, it's like, you know, a huge amount, a demonstrative amount of funding was used of their investment for legal actions that Leo was taking against everybody, including companies that I'm related to and other companies that I'm aware of, where he just kept using their money to hire a legal team that just walked in where he pointed them, didn't question any ethics, didn't question anything about the law, just did it because they were being paid, right? And I told you that the last time, just to refresh people's memory. We entered into court. At one stage, we had every top legal firm in the country in the courtroom for small startups liquidation and receivership. It's absolutely boggling, right?
Yeah.
This guy at one stage had three senior counsel or something. You know,
and you're not
senior
talking,
counsel during
talking big money, daily rate,
hundreds of thousands, right? Never mind the amount of money that they've spent just to try and reclaim and get the money back. So, you know, like, what people have to look at is, this did not happen easily. This has not been done lightly. And you're dealing with a guy that has been doing everything in his power to avoid this situation. And he's been throwing money, good money after bad money, at the situation. That is not his money, right? So get the paradox.
Yeah.
They're paying for their own legal action, where he's using their money to defend against their legal action.
Sounds like RTE.
It does.
They're using the tax I paid to revenue.
They're using your own money to pursue you. Exactly. That's a great example. Exactly. It's like, oh, I'm going to take money out of the Pilo Hotel, and I'm going to use that money, that's your hotel and your cash flow, to fight against you because you want your hotel back.
Why was nobody else in Steelworks shouting stop? You know, how come there was nobody even, like, we're talking about regulators, we're talking about like a bad liquidator basically in the first place, which you might mention, but the bad actors within the company, like, how come nobody was telling Leo that this is not good, this is not what I thought I was getting into, you know? It's odd.
Yeah. So if you look at the chain events, Keith, so it's like, you know, if we take away all the BS that he's been involved in previous, right, just look at the fundamental facts of this part, right, and then I think the rest will come out over time. But if you look at it, his auditor was standing over accounts that showed that in 1 year there was 42+ million in assets, and then signed off that there was no assets in that company, right? The assets had been stripped. There's no other way to word it, right? He used a document which was, again, hugely contested, right? There's a very lengthy affidavit being submitted in relation to that, which is obviously has brought this decision, right? Then you had a liquidator, John Healy, who was appointed around the same time that he was appointed to Altada. So totally conflict of interest by the same guy, the same creditor. One was involuntary, one was voluntary. Okay. He appointed John Healy to Al.Tada with it, like in the grand scheme of things, an insignificant amount of money, right? It was actually less than the threshold. It was like something like 30K. The threshold is 50K, and he still got away with it, right? He went into this business, and we focused on this one. So this was a voluntary liquidation because he was the single person that was allowed to put into voluntary liquidation. And not one person in that professional circle said, wait a second, you're moving $42 million of assets or euros, depending on the currency. They say 42 million. It's tomato, but look, it's high. It's probably more money
A
because
lot of money.
these are performing businesses, right? And remember, the iPass was generating millions of euros in Dundrum. Pillow Hotel is a very successful family hotel that's generating cash flow. So this is not like buildings that are like, empty. This is a commercial business that they have a right to profit from, right? And never mind just getting their money back. And not anywhere in that circle. And then you bring it down into very credible local business guys that validated him, which is Bernie Brogan, junior and senior, high profile guys, were involved in the business with him. And they've allowed this guy to do this also.
Yeah.
Right.
And we should say that we did put in a request for one of the Brogans, Brogan Senior, to come on, and we gave him the opportunity to come on, but he said I think his answer was he's just sick of it and doesn't want to talk about it anymore. So make of that what you will.
Well, just like, where's the accountability? And again, just to give a fundamental point, categorically, they were with Geoff Leo pitching for this funding. So it's a fundamental part of this, right? Right. And then how much fraud was committed from using this funding? That's the reality. We have to start calling it as we see it.
Yeah.
Right.
So buying the castle
fraud,
and then taking a loan out on the castle.
It's fraud. Signing off in a company where assets have been moved to somebody else using insolvency is fraud.
Yeah.
Right. Stripping a company of its assets and moving those assets away from a shareholder investor is fraud, right? Categorically. And then if you break down into it, drilling down, as you know, there's spin-off of companies. Again, I think I'm at 5 founders, similar to myself, that Geoff Leo has done this with his team, right? Where he strategically goes in, takes a loan, takes a position, takes the security and pushes the company into some kind of insolvency process. We're the most high profile one for 2 reasons. And a very close colleague of mine who I met face to face for the first time, he's been demonstrably supportive and working very hard to highlight this bad actor in terms of what he's done to Dundrum. And, it's the first time I've heard this being paraphrased, and he just said, no one was talking about AI in Ireland until Al.Tada was out. Like he said, like literally, you were like everywhere. You were a high profile company with a technology that predated any of the AI stuff that's out there now, right? Yeah. And nobody's asking that question. And that's where it sits.
Where could you have been if he hadn't done what he did? Do you know what I mean? Like I know you probably don't want to think about that, and I'm sure you're exactly where you want to be now. But where could that company have been? What could it have brought to Ireland? Now there's talk from the Irish government. I can't remember specifically who said it. It could have been Bertie Ahern or someone like that, saying we're relying too much on American investment or whatever. We had the potential to have our own, Facebook, Apple, whatever, in Ireland, born in Ireland, developed in Ireland by Irish people, and we allowed it to be wrecked and taken down.
Well, I have a categoric from somebody who is going to go on affidavit once we get this thing into process, which I can't discuss too much about, right? And he has told me categorically he moved with the tech, and he said they didn't change it. So like it's gone into the very shareholders that pushed us into insolvency, Rocktop. They've rebranded as Rocktop Technologies IO, and they're executing our pipeline. And they've generated over 7.1 billion in non-performing loans. So that will give you where it is, and that's where we would be, right? So I don't even have to hypothesize.
It is, and that's where you should be. But
Keith, if I was another founder and I woke up in the morning and was like, I'm looking at my name on the patents every morning, I'd be like, fuck, I can't get rid of this guy. I'm kind of like the United Living Dead, right? They still can't take away the fact that it's my patents, right?
Yeah.
So, shame on you guys.
Totally. I mean, like, I hope you can sleep at night, and money does not bring comfort. And if an asset was basically stolen, and you then, if you purchase stolen goods, you're an accessory to a crime. Surely, I mean, so look, we'll see how that goes, but we know exactly where that would have been, and we know so the point for me is there was an opportunity for us. We had a homegrown company building AI, like literally everything everyone's talking about is the future, and you were the first to do it. We had that. We had our own Facebook. We had our own Apple. We had our own LinkedIn, whatever it is. These big American companies coming in here, and we're giving them tax breaks, blah, blah, blah. We're giving them tax breaks, and then we're worried about them pulling out, and it's freaking us out. And we go, well, we can't be relying on them on too much. What are we doing? We're destroying our own indigenous homegrown versions. So make of that what you will. So shut up complaining, basically. Not you, Al.
Well, look, there's a guy DC. If you check him out, we might cover off a show on the startup ecosystem. I think it'd be interesting if you look at his anecdotal stories. He's releasing advice, and he works with a company called Shore Ventures. And I've had people send his post to me saying, "Look at this fucking bullshit." He was the first guy that stepped out, crucifying what was happening with Al.Al. So he was one of the main guys that was sharing, liking, grotesque comments, setting up. He was involved in a hashtag LeeWork, so they were comparing us to WeWork. But that's a compliment. They're putting this at that level, right? But the reality is now everybody's wondering why the sentiment of Ireland is down to the bottom of the barrel in terms of this is how you guys behave. Jesus, do not fail in Ireland, right? Okay. And I'm still waiting for Charlie Taylor to reach out for comment, because generally, if it was the other side, he'd blown up our phone saying, "I'm publishing something today at 12 o'clock.
Yeah.
You've got 20 minutes to comment." Right? Literally, that was one. That's a fucking true story.
Oh.
However, I will say this, and this is probably out of character. This has restored my faith in Ireland slightly, right? In terms of, there is obviously a group of people in Ireland that are now sick of the corruption, and they're starting to get tired of it. And I'm talking about judges, legal guys, legal firms, insolvency practitioners that are looking at this saying, okay, this has to stop. So that's very positive. And
let's talk about what's happening now to Steelworks. So the decision now, because Jeff, who was only, I believe, paying back 50% of what he owed, that was the agreement, because they were just happy to get something back off him. He maybe paid the first one, defaulted on the second, or couldn't show how he was going to pay the next. And now Steelworks is being liquidated.
This is a simplistic description. I have this from, again, a source that we can't disclose. So my understanding, this is a layman's interpretation of, but my understanding is that it was quite binary. They just required the reinstatement, because remember now they had the security on the assets, and he used a liquidator, John Healy, to remove them from the assets. Who was then subsequently removed and replaced by Kieran Wallace in Wennings Holdings. So they liquidated Wenning Holdings, and then right, just to refresh everybody's memory. And I think they just required, there's probably more nuances than I'm explaining, but they just required to be reinstated as the senior security on their assets. That's it. That's all you had to do. You couldn't do it.
So Steelworks being liquidated, and they are the parent company of everything?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe so. I think, and he started moving stuff into his own name and all that kind of stuff as well. So I think it's going to get, if you get into Andrew O'Leary's shoes, it's got to be I think it's got to be like onion, right? It's got to be layer after layer after layer. And then you've got, as we spoke to here openly, he's got his band of warriors around him. They're probably all, running for the hills now and trying to, I don't know, are they going to protect him to try and save themselves, or are they actually going to do the right thing?
They're going to
They haven't done the right thing thus far.
They're going to have to do it themselves. They're going to have to.
Do you think so?
I mean, we're waiting for Tom Lyons and Charlie Taylor to write the article, and you're available, I presume, to speak.
Anytime, yeah, of course. Yeah, you travel over and sit down. He came into my office when Al.Al was, he did a site visit. Wait, my phone's ringing. Wait, sorry. I got a very funny message from somebody, Keith, who's been tracking this for some time, who's a big cheerleader of ours, and they they know the inside. They worked with us in Altada. They've been close to this for a long time. They were deeply impacted actually by it as creditors themselves, and they came through dark times as a result of what happened. Empty promises. They were getting the money back. They weren't getting the money back. If they were in the receivership process, they would have got the money back. And then Leo came in with John Healy, his liquidator, and that he's openly said has a relationship with him. So maybe he's back in the wrong horse. He might get up a humble now. Probably not. I don't think he can even spell that word. But somebody said, "Who's next, Al? Who's next on your shit list?"
I mean, like,
pick a letter.
Come to us. Tell us your story, and we'll go after them. I mean, if Jeff has done this before, and you mentioned like you're aware of other people that he's done similar things to, probably not to such a high profile company as yourselves, and you guys it's got an inordinate amount of negative coverage at the time. But if come on and talk about it, because we can now. We can talk about it. If this is a Netflix series, there's about 6 episodes towards the end that you think is the end. Do you know what I mean? And then you really, oh, hang on, there's more bad shit after that. There's a whole other episode. Oh, there's another episode of bad. So I mean, this is, we can just keep going.
Keith, a guy called me late last night. We got the exact time. It was late for me. He's based in the States, and he rang me and said, "Is this true? Is this true?" And I said, "No, it is." He said, "Oh man, I can't believe this is he's actually going to be stopped." He couldn't believe it. He's been dealing with this guy for 12 years. He's absolutely destroyed him. Like, seriously, like he just destroyed his company, destroyed him, destroyed his team, came at him personally. He's just like,
a lot of people are ready to talk. And we also were contacted by a man who worked directly with him, like day to day, side by side, and he wanted to talk. He couldn't talk at the time, so hopefully he'll come on and tell his story as well. Like, I mean, look, I hope Netflix are paying you a lot of money for the rights to this story. So look, we will come back to Jeff. Great day for you. Congratulations to yourself. Congratulations to Niamh. And it's like, it is the end. I know you've got more, you've a bit further to go, but I think it's vindication, and you should take a moment to just breathe this in.
We haven't won the war yet, but it's definitely one of the battles that we've been watching closely. So, yeah.
You know what I mean? If it's a battle, it's Waterloo. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the people who are supposed to regulate things like this. So there's lots of people to blame. Like, Jeff should never have been allowed to do what he did. Somehow the system within Ireland allowed him. A clever guy. Let's just give him his dues. Clever guy. He played the system, and he won for a little while. It was a temporary victory, but it's the regulators that we need to look at now. How are things regulated in this country? Financially, banking. We've spoken before about on this on MOTH about HIQA, and they're the regulators for care homes. Now, we've seen what happened in the care homes during COVID and continues to happen. Terrible stories. You can watch all of those stories on our YouTube channel. Anytime you want. They're there, sitting there. Go and have a look. HIQA have no teeth. It seems the people who are supposed to make sure that people like Geoff Leo can't do what he did actually aren't regulating the financial sector of Ireland, and it's preventing people coming to Ireland and doing business. And also, now I spoke to a friend of the show, whistleblower, a man called Cormac. That's actually why I was late, because I was running from the interview to get into the studio, and it was tight. And then we had a few little grams in the work. But I spoke to Cormac this morning. Now, Cormac he's a what is he? Like, he's a financial expert, Cormac Butler, and he in 2010 he wrote about this thing that was coming down the line, and he spoke about the banking sector, and he spoke about things like the banks being allowed to hide losses. Now, the stuff he tells me is insane, but the central bank are not categorically not regulating the banks. We can say that. I'm not afraid to say that. It's true. They're not doing what they're supposed to do. They are concerned that if they actually regulate the banks, because the banks are being allowed to hide losses, okay? And the reason they were allowed to hide losses in the first place in 2010 was because directors wanted to make more money. So all the fallout from the crash, people losing houses, people losing their lives, people losing marriages, people losing their mental health, all comes from the fact that there was a loophole developed by the chartered accountants, and directors use this so they could inflate their profits and make more bonuses based on dodgy house sales. I bought a house at the time for 400,000, probably worth about 250,000. I shouldn't have allowed to do that because the bank created the inflation of the house. So the central bank aren't regulating, and since then they have not regulated, and thus we have the highest homelessness ever. Children who are homeless, living in trying to go to school, living in hotel rooms. We have problems. Nobody can get a mortgage. Very few people get a mortgage, and it all comes back to this, and it all lands on the desk of our great central bank, who are not regulating the banks. That's it. Fact. Okay. so I don't know if you've seen. There's a new, on a different note. I don't know if you've seen this movie coming out. It's due to land in cinemas any minute. So we might just play it, roll it there, Colette. If you see the
it's getting exciting, Keith.
MOTH movies, I'm building this up too much. I'm worried now. MOTH movies is the one that's yeah. So let's just have a look at this.
In a country where systems exist mainly to pretend they work, one government had only one hope: to do absolutely nothing. From the people behind Nama the musical and RTE Unaccountable comes the laugh out loud hit of the year, The Regulators, starring the health inspector with no powers, the central banker who can't prosecute, and the energy watchdog that can't bite. So, what are you going to do about the abuse, the fraud, the exploding bills? Absolutely nothing. They show up late, audit lightly, and leave quietly. We believe strongly in transparency, in principle. We made a strongly worded recommendation in PDF. You should read it. They've got briefcases, highlighters, and a 12-month response timeline. So what are you going to do about it? Absolutely nothing. Because when the going gets tough, the tough write a press release and set up a task force that never meets. The Regulators. They're not here to help. They're here to recommend that someone else might someday try to help. In cinemas, never. Rated T for Toothless, now showing on all Department of Nothing streaming platforms.
Oh man, can't wait to see that movie. If it's the Department of Nothing, though, it'll never come out. That's the problem. That's where we're at, lads.
Oh man,
that's the truth. That's the most honest. That's the most honest portrayal of Ireland I've heard ever.
But it's it's kind of in some kind of paradoxical fucking tandem universe, right? It's like it's the yin and yang of the Irish mentality. It's fantastically, we just get on with it, we do it, Asher, we be grand, versus like the frog in the boiling pot of water, where like the heat's just been slowly turned up. And as you said, I'm equally guilty of like naivety in relation to it. I hadn't even tied back to that foundational issue as you just spoke to, which is, but as you're saying it makes perfect sense, because you don't just solve a housing crisis overnight. It takes a lot of planning, strategic development. The construction guys need to be on board, planning office need to be on board. You need to get into that supply and demand mentality. There needs to be tax breaks put in place, and as you correctly said, after the recession, which it now makes a lot of sense, it's just triggering. They built in commercial tax break and incentives for office blocks and for data centers and all of this kind of stuff. And even if you go to Cork, which I had to travel a couple of days ago, kind of an in and out trip, and I went down towards the train station, Kent Station, and it's like a new city has just evolved from nowhere. It's like just endless office blocks. I was just ordering coffee in one of these, one of these portable vans or whatever, right? And I just said, geez, that's a huge development. Is that apartments? And no, it's in another office block. And she just said straight out, what are they doing? We can't even find somewhere to live. Where are all these people going to live? Like, even if they are going to be full of people that are coming in, an influx of people to work in these high power FDI tech companies, where are they going to live anyway? It's just going to drive the price up higher and higher. And then I heard, again, I'm open to correction on this, but I think like now they're offering for four people to join a mortgage. I mean, like, it's like, that's just like literally, let's just throw more fuel on the fire to completely, isolate anybody that's trying to buy a family home and put them up against an even more competitive situation.
So,
right?
so the reason you can't buy a house, the reason you can't get a mortgage is the central bank have told the banks to issue less mortgages. Okay. So you issue less mortgages. There's more people fighting for houses. Those who do get mortgages have a bit of money. There's probably two people working, maybe they'd have to be on like 100,000 each. Probably people that work in banks, people that work in civil service, because they're guaranteed that income. And most people can't get a mortgage, which means it drives the price of the houses up again. It's creating a false economy. It's creating another bubble. And then you've got the vulture funds coming in and buying up apartments and et cetera, et cetera. So, and all of this comes back to a loophole that was created just before the crash to allow directors to hide losses, banking directors to hide losses, so they could take bigger bonuses. So take bonuses when they actually shouldn't have taken bonuses because they was based on a false profit. Do you know what I mean? So it all comes back to that, and the central bank are still protecting the banks. Now they're saying you're not allowed to issue as many mortgages, and there has to be less mortgages. But that's because they're doing that rather than saying to the banks, you need to tell us what your losses are and we need to prosecute. And end of story. Okay, so that's it, Al.
But is this not? Am I like incorrect in saying that like AIB's and Bank of Ireland's annual report published is like demonstrably profitable? Like Bank of Ireland got themselves out of state ownership, right? Like,
yeah. We bailed them out. Here's another thing, right? I bought my house, say, for instance, I bought a house before the crash. Let's say I bought the house for 400,000, right? Then there was the crash. So the central bank and the government said to somebody, like, whatever, yeah, 400,000, that's fair. The bank were able to say to me, here's a mortgage for 400,000. We think that's a fair amount for that house, right? They should have advised me that that's not worth that. If they'd been honest about what they were hiding, right? If they were transparent and if they were honest, they would have said to me, listen, there's a crash coming. I wouldn't buy that.
Yeah. And they knew. I mean, like he should, like I previously worked. I worked in financial services, right? Yeah. Like I was in investment banking around that time, and everybody knew what was coming to it. Like, you know what I mean? Like it was like it's just a matter of time,
What caused the crash? The banking sector.
Well, it's the whole thing like collapse. Cognizant of, I just want to plug in just one thing in terms of there's hope yet for Irishness, which is a guy that I'm a huge fan of, Liam Neeson, has come out with as the OG alpha male. He's managed to hook up with the OG Baywatch, Pamela Anderson. So it's true, yeah. It's
all over. Are you telling me Liam Neeson is taken?
He's definitely proved that he's got a set of skills, and he will find you. So he must have tracked down Pammy. But
I tell you one thing. I did read something a few years ago about Liam Neeson's set of skills, and he's quite girthy. Let's just put it that way.
Well, he's listen, we are very talented as a he's definitely got the bragging rights after this one, because I heard maybe it's a different generation, but as a misspent youth, Baywatch was a prerequisite as a kid.
I'll leave, mate.
For a certain closing scene.
Yeah. I've heard about his
running.
I saw a set of skills compared to a can of Coke. Let's just leave it there.
Pabby, I will find you.
I got it.
It's okay, leave him downstairs.
I tell you, the only Pam you're going to get to know.
No. Don't spoil it. Keep it
Keep it
somewhat.
Keep it clean. It's a family show.
Family show.
We want the bankers' children are watching.
Yeah, Leo will send the censorship guys after us. He's probably got a contact there as well.
He's got the censorship. He's got the censorship regulator in his pocket. Just in case.
Muted.
Fair play to Liam Neeson. That's good. Fair play. I mean, because he had the a tragic loss of his wife, and he seemed to be he seemed to mourn her for a long time, and now it's like Pamela Anderson. Jesus, man, you're living the dream. All of us, we're all with you. Do it for us. Sorry, shouldn't have done that.
Take one for the team, as they say.
Great news. Good to end on a positive note. Thanks, Al. Take it easy.
Well done, man. See you, buddy. Bye.
Yeah, we'll talk to you next week. Good luck. Bye. So we have this interview to play. I'll play as much of it as I can. I think we've probably got about 20 minutes, maybe worth to play that we time. But I will play once this show finishes. I will immediately upload that interview to play straight afterwards. You have to watch this. If you're looking for a mortgage, if you got in trouble for not paying your mortgage after 2010, after the crash, if your marriage broke down, if your children are looking for a mortgage, if you're paying rent, everybody has to watch this. This is the truth. This is what's actually happening. When you're like, I can't figure out why can't they fix it? They can't fix this mess because they won't. Central bank won't regulate. And now, I am a little worried, but I wouldn't say this. If I had said this and it wasn't true, I'd probably end up, in prison, maybe in a hotel, worse. Anyway, let's have a look at this. And I'm going to say goodbye now, but know that this full interview will be available on our social media channels. It will also be available on YouTube. So go to our YouTube, MOTH_news, all caps, I believe, and show it to your friends. But this is Cormac, who, let me just find his title. So Cormac Butler, he talks about the Irish banks hiding losses, central banks' reluctance to enforce transparency, mortgage market implications, systematic failure in financial regulations, advice from mortgage holders and defaulters, which he has at the end in the full video, which we'll have to watch afterwards. So thank you very much to Cormac, and Cormac will be on again. There's so much to this, and I just didn't have enough time. Like, this was a long interview. So watch this section and watch the rest later on this very stream. Take care. Have a good weekend. Cormac Butler, you're very welcome to Moth News. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.
So I suppose we'll start at the start, if that's okay with you. It's a very good place to start, isn't it? What the song says.
So yeah.
Take us back. What were you doing professionally before you started to raise concerns, and what were the concerns? What was that moment where you said, I need to speak out here?
Well, prior to the crash in the year 2000 and even before, I was a trainer for bank regulators. I trained over 100 regulators worldwide in all countries, Africa, Asia, America. And my role was to ensure that regulators could understand how banks operated and understand the risks involved. At the time, there was plenty of regulation and fairly sturdy regulation. For instance, the accounting rules said that banks must reveal all losses. And then there are special rules called the Basel rules, which ensure that banks have sufficient capital in order to survive. So people borrowing money from the banks felt reassured that banks would do the appropriate due diligence to make sure that people could afford what they needed to borrow. And investors could feel reassured that the banks were well regulated, and many families in Ireland and the UK and in Asia put money into banking shares, knowing that there was risk, but that the risk was fairly contained and controlled. Around 2006 and 2007, banks were operating very well, at least in the public sense. They appeared to be very profitable. But in the financial crisis of 2008, it took people off guard. Many people who had invested in banks saw their investments halve or quarter or even disappear altogether. And it was very strange given the amount of regulation and given the resources that banks had on compliance that this should have emerged. It subsequently emerged that banks were operating a two-tier system. In public, they were producing accounts which were very profitable, but in private, they were producing accounts which showed that they were potentially insolvent or in difficulty. And that situation should never occur. Banks deliberately misled the public, which is a potential criminal offence. They deliberately misled regulators, and there are a lot of casualties. And I think Ireland is well aware of these casualties. A lot of people took out mortgages between 2005 and 2010, which they should not have done if they were given the appropriate information. The banks had that information, but they chose not to reveal it. And therefore, a lot of customers suffered as a result of the bank's failures. So in essence, banks imposed their losses on customers despite being bailed out. So it's a very serious breach. And we now have situations where people are facing repossession in the courts. In some cases, banks are forcing people into prison until their houses are sold and then releasing them. So it's quite a serious matter. I don't think it's going to improve without some form of intervention.
So was there a specific moment, a meeting, something that you saw, a document that made you say, I need to, like a day? Do you remember a day where you went, I'm going to have to
I remember writing an article in the Irish Times talking about the American subprime crisis. That was back in about 2010. And that article disclosed that in America, many banks were buying what we call subprime products. And these products were completely worthless, and the banks didn't know how to value them. And I was showing the anomalies that created. And somebody, as a result of that article, somebody got in touch with me in the UK, and he said the problem is an awful lot worse than that. It's not a case of bank incompetence, where banks are negligent or making mistakes. It's a case of deliberate action, where banks are deliberately misleading both shareholders, the shareholders, the Irish government, and customers. So that moment occurred in about 2010.
So when you published that article, you wrote that article, it appeared in the Irish Times. Did you feel an immediate effect? Did it affect your personal life? You know, was there at that point? Did you was there any sort of pushback from certain quarters?
No. At the time, I think the Irish Times were eager to get onto the story, because from what I can recall, the Irish Times attempted to cover a court case where AIB wanted to raise money, and the two journalists knew there were problems, but they were told to leave the court case. In other words, it was held in camera. So it was obvious that a lot of information was being concealed. And at the time, the Irish Times wanted to cover that story. So they encouraged me to write these articles, and I wrote a few after that. But afterwards, the Institute of Chartered Accountants kicked up and said that I shouldn't be writing these articles. They tried to write counter articles to what I was saying. And eventually, the deputy head of the International Accounting Standards Board wrote a letter to the Irish Times to say that I was misleading in the articles. And at the same time, the Institute of Chartered Accountants in Ireland said that it wasn't illegal to hide losses. They said that the accounting standards allowed it, so it wasn't illegal to hide losses. That occurred in about 2015, and it was timed to coincide with the bank inquiry, because the bank inquiry revealed an awful lot of information. But all the bankers and the auditors there would have been in trouble if they had admitted to hiding losses. But when they could say, well, we admit to hiding losses, but the law forced us to do so, they were able to mislead the public. So the bank inquiry was a complete waste of time. Not so much a waste of time, it was actually very damaging. And the reason it was damaging is because people assumed that, okay, banks misbehaved. We had an inquiry. The banks were forced to hide losses. It's not a question of the banks wanting to mislead the public. They were forced to hide losses. There was nothing they could do about it. But now they've corrected their errors and let's move on. So the bank inquiry encouraged a situation where, with hindsight, the banks could have done better. And that's basically their conclusion. And they said, now we're going to move on. There's new rules in place and that won't happen again. But there was two lies there. First of all, the banks, it wasn't a case of the banks not knowing what was happening. They knew that they were misleading people. They knew that some people were going to suffer. And they said, well, yes, some people are going to suffer, but we're forced to do this under EU law. In other words, we're forced to hide losses and not tell the public. And that is a complete lie.
So, I mean, to any man on the street or any dog on the street, as I say, like it would, if you say to me, any organization, certainly banks, are allowed to hide losses, I just wouldn't believe you. You know, how can this be said in the public arena? How can this be said in, I mean, I don't understand why the chartered accountants were interested, bothered. Maybe you could explain that to me. But like to come out and say that it's okay to hide losses, essentially, if you're dealing with a bank, you're taking a mortgage out with them. It seems like you need to know everything. There needs to be transparency. That just doesn't make any sense at all. So how were they able to say that, and for there not to be public outcry or outcry from government officials?
Well, we can break that question down. First of all, banks knew in 2005 that there was an alleged loophole, and I say alleged, in the accounting standards which allowed banks to hide losses. Now, the reason that banks want to hide losses in general is because instead of bonuses being confined to profit-making transactions, bonuses could be awarded to anyone who entered into a transaction. So if you take America as an example, because it all appears to have started in America, what characterized the banking crisis in America was that bankers were paid billions in bonuses to amass trillions in losses. So they were paid billions in bonuses to enter into transactions such as subprime mortgages, where they knew they were making losses. And what happened back in 2005 or even earlier is that if you were working as a trader in a bank, you could give loans to anyone. You didn't have to worry about their ability to repay. You could give loans to anyone, and your bonus was based on the volume of lending rather than the quality of your lending. So the motivation to hide losses is that you are guaranteed a huge bonus. And in America, as I pointed out, bankers were paid billions in bonuses to amass trillions, to hide, to enter into transactions which had losses in their trillions. In Ireland, bankers were paid millions in bonuses, were paid millions in bonuses to enter into transactions which caused billions in losses. So you can see the motivation to hide losses. It's very good for bonuses.
Yeah, I could see the motivation for losses if they've decided that it's okay. You get your bonus just for, I mean, if I went out and I was a car salesman and I had a conversation with somebody about a car and it was and it was all on finance or whatever, and I got a bonus once I sold the car, like without doing due diligence or whatever. It could have been. I mean, are you saying in theory I could sell a car to a cat or somebody who doesn't have the necessary money to be able to pay the loan back? Or
let's say you had a car dealership and you bought 30 cars at 40,000, and you decided to sell them to your friends at 25,000 or 10,000 at below market value. you could record an accounting profit even though you've clearly made a loss for your employer. So basically, it's a motivation to steal. It's that
So
serious.
it's fraud.
Definitely fraud. The reason why I say it's fraud is because the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales, which basically governs what happens in UK banks, told banks that they could hide losses. They then denied saying that they could hide losses. So they told banks they could hide losses, and then they denied that they said banks could hide losses. That's more serious than negligence.
Yeah, totally. But if for me, I always want to try and follow the money, as it were. Like, so if a member of the government or officiating organization or watchdog is allowing a bank to say they can hide losses, who in turn are allowing staff to sell mortgages to get bonuses, even though selling mortgages for below, or for houses for below, whatever.
Yeah.
Is there so they're not just doing that surely so that there's extra money going into the pockets of the salesman, the car salesman. Surely there's money going back up.
Well, you see,
I'm not saying hypothetically, if I was a car salesman and my boss, the owner of the garage, was allowing me to do that, and I was making bonuses, he's not going to be happy if he's making losses and I'm making bonuses. So,
well, the owner of the garage might be a director who's looking after the garage on behalf of shareholders, and if he's allowed to record an accounting profit on your transactions, he's happy. The shareholders don't realize what's going on, so therefore they can't complain. And if the shareholders don't realize what's going on, the regulators won't realize what's going on. Therefore, the regulators won't complain. And in relation to banking, the regulator, which is the Irish Central Bank, are on record stating that banks provided misleading accounts and therefore they couldn't regulate the banks properly.
So by the time, say, the central bank found out that this was happening, they had to be okay with the...
It was too late. So therefore the choice, I mean, they found out after the banks had gone bankrupt or became severely insolvent. So it was too late for the central bank to actually take corrective action. The choice the central bank had was to expose this or to cover it up. And at the time, the European Central Bank had lent vast sums of money to Irish banks. And the policy that the central banks and the Irish government chose was to bail out the banks first and then get the banks to reveal their losses. And that meant that the ECB could be repaid. Okay,
so we might get back to that in a minute. I sort of skipped forward a little bit. But I think some of this stuff bears repeating, because for me, it's kind of just trying to get my head around join the dots and get my head around everything. So you said that Irish banks are concealing losses that could make them technically insolvent. Could you explain what those hidden losses are and how they've been concealed? Is that fair enough for me to say?
Yeah. Well, going back to 2005, you might come to me and say, I want a mortgage of 300,000 based on my salary. And I might say to you, I'd say to myself, first of all, if this guy takes out a mortgage for 400,000, I can get a bigger bonus. So therefore, I'll encourage him to take out the maximum mortgage possible.
Is this when we were seeing like 110% mortgages?
110% mortgages and that type of thing. So I'm encouraging reckless lending. Now, the legal people say reckless lending is not a tort. If you have money and you want to lend it recklessly and it's your money, you do what you like. It's and you can, fools and money have to part. But even though it may not be a tort to lend recklessly, there's two laws that they're breaking. One is the company law regulations, which state that if you do decide to lend recklessly, you must calculate the losses that you've suffered immediately on the date the contract is signed. And then consumer regulation, in particular unfair terms legislation from Europe, states that if you're going to impose some of those losses on the customer, they're called foreseeable losses, you must tell the customer in advance so that the customer can determine what the true cost of finance is. And banks broke both of those rules. They didn't calculate the losses and reveal them to the public by way of published accounts. And because they didn't reveal them to the public, they couldn't really reveal them to the consumer. So the banks knew that the financial crisis was going to come down quite heavily. And what they should have said to customers at that point is, we know something is going to happen. You don't know about it, but we know something is going to happen. Therefore, this loan is very risky. And you shouldn't enter into the loan contract. Because if you were an independent advisor back in 2005, and you knew that all banks were hiding considerable losses, you would say to the customer that chances are that the property you're buying is overvalued. There's also a very strong chance that your income projections are too high, given what's going to happen. Now, it may be okay if you're in the government sector because your salary is guaranteed, but for the self-employed and most people in private firms who are about to lose their jobs, taking a mortgage out in between 2005 and 2008 would have been a very bad idea. Now, some people would do it, but under the consumer rules, the unfair terms, you must tell the customer all the information you have that's of relevance to the customer. And between 2005 and 2008, for many customers, they were not aware of the true cost of finance. They were not aware that there were foreseeable losses which the banks were going to impose on the customer. And there is case law to support that. And the case law states that if a customer has not enough information to make an economic decision, but the banks are aware of information that they're not passing on to the customer, then it's an unfair term, and it's difficult for banks to enforce loans in those circumstances.
So I did actually take out a mortgage in 2008.
Yeah.
What were the potential risks to me? Well, first of all, I bought a house for a lot more than it was worth.
Yeah.
If you probably 12 months later, maybe, so I suppose that's a problem, isn't it? Because I'm paying. Luckily, I had the income tax, the inflation linked. I can't remember that it was my mortgage repayments were a lot less than they should have been because they were linked to.
Linked to Euribor. Yeah, they were linked to. They were probably linked to Euribor.
So I was lucky in that. So what were the potential risks to me then? I'm taking out that money a lot more than I should have, a lot more than the house was worth. So first of all, house prices were being
inflated, overvalued,
falsely inflated.
Yeah.
Because there was more money to be made, more bonds to be made. If you sold a house that was worth 250,000 for 400,000, that's okay. So now I'm getting you. Okay, so that's okay. So I'm getting a loan out for a house from the bank. The bank are kind of responsible, or maybe all fully responsible for the fact that this house is almost double the value. I'm buying it for double the value it's worth. Okay.
Well, just imagine you were in front of me in 2008 and I was an independent banker, and you said to me, there's a house on the market for 400,000. I'll just guess your income. Your income is 120,000, and therefore you can well afford that mortgage. And we'll just say, for the sake of argument, that you were self-employed. Now, what the bank would have to say is, prior to 2005, if we were evaluating this loan, we would have to take into account any foreseeable losses. In other words, we try to estimate what you can afford to pay against what you are paying. And if there is evidence that your income is going to go down, or if there is evidence that the property is going to decline, then we would have to tell you that this is very risky and potentially not a very good idea. So that's how an independent banker would operate. And under the unfair terms legislation, that's what he is obliged to do. so that you can make an economic decision. You can say, well, the property is worth 400,000, but I do know that banks are hiding huge losses, not only the bank I'm dealing with, but all the other banks in Ireland and the UK. So some sort of correction is on its way, and some sort of severe correction is on its way. So therefore, even though the property appears to be 400,000, it's probably only worth 250,000. And in theory, what the bank should do is they should ask the valuer to value the house, not based on current valuations, but based on the fact that there is going to be a crash or some sort of disaster in a few years' time or a few months' time, because banks are hiding huge amounts of losses. They're not complying with the regulations, and therefore the credit market is going to dry up. And given that the price of houses is heavily dependent on the availability of credit, it follows that 400,000 is more than likely an unrealistic valuation. And if the true valuation is 250,000, then your foreseeable losses are 150,000. And you have to include that as well as your interest to see your true cost of finance. So you would say to yourself, this is quite a bad idea. I might be better off renting it for a few more years rather than paying an extortionate 150,000 on top of the interest. That's what the bank is meant to have told you. They didn't tell you.
No.
Now, banks could argue, oh, we didn't see the crash coming.
Well, I mean, there was a lot of talk about it, wasn't there? I mean, there was some people
there
talk.
was. I mean, a guy called Morgan Kelly raised concerns, but then you had people on the other side, particularly economists which were pro-banks, stating that there might be a soft landing. So, but that's not the important
Soft
point.
landing, yeah.
The real important point is that banks were hiding losses at the time. They were misleading the regulator, and they were relying on borrowed funds. So they were borrowing from overseas and putting misleading information into their published accounts to borrow money. That's quite a serious company law failing. So a crash had to emerge. There was no way that a crash could not have emerged. And you could argue, well, Morgan Kelly, he's just one economist. He may be right, he may be wrong, but there are plenty of other economists who are pro-bank. We call them green jersey agenda economists, because they were promoting banking and promoting property prices. But the economists are not important. What is important is that the banks had information that there were misleading people who were lending them money and misleading the regulator. So something had to emerge. Those losses would eventually come out.
But there was nobody at the time. I even remember, I feel like I remember our Taoiseach at the time giving out about people trying to talk down the growth of the economy. Like there was this general drive to get on the property market, to get something. House prices are never coming down. You know, if you don't buy now, it's just going to get more expensive. So this is like a so I mean, you talk about these, like you call them green jersey economists, journalists, whatever. You know, I often wonder like why they were promoting the banks and what was in it for them. Maybe they just loved banks, possibly. You know, maybe they're just fans of Irish banks, like I am Manchester United. You know, but I always worry with things like this. Like there's generally financial gain somewhere. I'm not accusing anybody of anything. I'm just saying it's very rare in society that somebody would be pro something and be so vocal about supporting something without benefiting from it in some way. So that was the, if people remember at the time, that was the, I mean, it still kind of exists, you know, in a way, but essentially I ended up buying a house that was, say, for instance, I bought for 400,000, was worth 250,000. It was tight at times, you know, there was times where we weren't sure if we'd pay the mortgage, you know, for every month for a long time.
Yeah.
If it happened that I couldn't repay the mortgage, I couldn't sell that house for the value of the mortgage. So I would have been absolutely scuppered. And I guarantee you at that time, I wouldn't have known that the bank
wouldn't have known, but the bank would have known.
Yeah.
And that's an important legal point, because it means that you couldn't make a proper economic decision, but the bank had information. which if they had passed on to you, you might have said, well, there might be a lot of economists thinking that the market is going to go up further and further and further, but banks are storing up huge losses. They're not revealing them. There's going to be a banking crisis. There has to be a banking crisis because it gets to the stage where the banks themselves cannot borrow money if they're conceding huge amounts of losses. And that causes a credit market crash. Therefore, you could not have made a proper economic decision based on the information that was given to you. The banks could have protected themselves if they said to valuers, when you are valuing this £400,000 property, take into account that banks are hiding huge amounts of losses, that the availability of credit will be restricted over the next 1 or 2 years, and therefore give us a realistic valuation rather than an optimistic valuation. And the valuer would have to come back and said, well, all of these properties are heavily dependent on the availability of credit. If there's going to be a restriction in credit, then this property is overvalued. Now, they won't be able to give you an exact figure. They won't be able to say it's 250, but the point is they know it's overvalued and they are required to estimate the loss on the overvaluation, or at least to give you the information so that you can estimate the loss. And there is plenty of case law on unfair terms where banks withhold information from the customer, and the customer wins because the customer cannot make an economic decision based on the contract that's in front of them.
So if at the time when I was looking at buying a house, I had a house to sell and then I was buying another house. So I needed an extra bedroom. There was an extra child. If I'd known somebody, if I had a friend in the banks and, was privy to something and I was out for a drink with them, they might have said to me, sell that house, rent, and buy that house in a year.
Yeah. Which would have been good advice. Yeah.
Which would have been great advice.
Yeah. But you can't believe that because he's not giving you a reason. I mean, he's basing it on an estimate. But if he had said to you, sell the house, but wait until the banks admit their huge losses before buying another house. And you might say, what do you mean admit to huge losses? And if he said to you, banks are currently hiding substantial losses as we speak, and that has to come out, and that's going to affect the credit market because Irish banks will not be able to borrow money if they are conceding losses in their published accounts. So therefore, there's going to be credit is going to dry up.